When Air Force Colonel Harrison denied Captain Erica Moore's request to join the emergency scramble mission, he told her she was too emotional for real combat. 3 hours later, she was alone in her F-22 Raptor, facing 8 enemy jets in a dogfight that would either make her a hero or end her career forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across Ramstein Air Base in Germany as Captain Erica Moore completed her pre-flight inspection of the F-22 Raptor. At 0630 hours, the flight line was already buzzing with activity, but Erica moved through her routine with the precision that had defined her 4 years of service. She was 26 years old, stood 5 feet 4, with auburn hair pulled back in regulation style, and possessed the kind of intense green eyes that seemed to absorb every detail around her. Erica had grown up in a small village outside Prague, where her father worked as an aircraft mechanic for Czech Airlines. She'd spent her childhood watching planes take off and land, dreaming of the day she'd pilot something more sophisticated than the crop dusters that occasionally buzzed their farm. Her path to the U.S. Air Force had been unconventional: a scholarship to MIT for aerospace engineering, followed by officer training and flight school, where she graduated 3rd in her class. But being 3rd in her class didn't translate to the assignment she'd hoped for. While her male classmates were deployed to active combat zones, Erica found herself stationed at Ramstein, flying patrol missions over the relatively quiet European theater. The F-22 beneath her hands was a magnificent machine, 62 feet of cutting-edge stealth technology, capable of supercruise speeds and equipped with the most advanced avionics systems in the world. Yet for all its capability, Erica rarely got to push it beyond routine training exercises. The 52nd Fighter Wing at Ramstein was commanded by Colonel Marcus Harrison, a grizzled veteran of 3 combat deployments who made no secret of his old-school attitudes. Harrison believed that fighter pilots needed to be ice-cold killers, emotionally detached warriors who could make split-second decisions without hesitation. In his view, Erica's European background and what he perceived as her emotional nature made her unsuitable for high-stakes missions. "Moore's a fine pilot," she'd overheard him telling Lieutenant Colonel Stevens just last week. "Technically proficient, follows procedures to the letter. But when the bullets start flying, you need someone who can compartmentalize. Europeans... they think too much, feel too much. Give me a pilot from Texas or Montana any day." Erica had bitten her tongue, just as she'd done dozens of times before. She'd learned to navigate the subtle prejudices that questioned whether someone with her accent, her background, her emotional intelligence could truly belong in the cockpit of America's most advanced fighter jet. Instead of protesting, she'd channeled her frustration into becoming the most prepared pilot on the base, while her colleagues spent their off-duty hours at the officers' club or exploring German nightlife. Erica immersed herself in advanced tactical studies. She'd memorized every possible engagement scenario, studied the flight characteristics of enemy aircraft down to their turning radii and climb rates, and developed an almost supernatural understanding of air-to-air combat dynamics. Her personal library contained classified tactical manuals that most pilots only glanced at, and she'd spent countless hours in the base's flight simulator running scenarios that pushed both her skills and the aircraft's capabilities to their limits. The irony wasn't lost on her that her emotional nature, the very trait that supposedly disqualified her from combat missions, had driven her to prepare more thoroughly than any pilot in the squadron. Her emotions weren't a weakness. They were fuel for an obsessive dedication to excellence that others couldn't match. As she finished her inspection and climbed into the cockpit, Erica checked the mission board one more time. Today's schedule showed the usual routine: a 2-hour patrol mission over the North Sea, practicing intercept procedures with friendly NATO forces. Nothing that would challenge her abilities or prove her worth in actual combat. She settled into the ejection seat and began the engine start sequence. The twin Pratt & Whitney engines spooling up with a sound that never failed to send electricity through her veins. The F-22's heads-up display came alive with data streams and targeting information, transforming the cockpit into a three-dimensional battlespace where every threat and opportunity was measured in milliseconds, but as routine. As today's mission appeared, Erica had learned to be ready for anything. In her flight bag, alongside the standard charts and emergency procedures, she carried additional tactical references and contingency plans that went far beyond what was required. Because if there was one thing her 4 years of being overlooked had taught her, it was that opportunity rarely announced itself in advance. The squadron briefing room at 0800 hours was a testament to military efficiency. Rows of perfectly aligned chairs facing a large display screen where mission parameters were projected in crisp detail. Captain Erica Moore took her usual seat in the third row, close enough to appear engaged but far enough back to avoid drawing attention. Around her, the other pilots of the 52nd Fighter Wing filtered in with the easy confidence that came from knowing their place in the hierarchy. Major Ryan Viper Thompson slid into the seat beside her, offering a brief nod of acknowledgement. Thompson was one of the few pilots who treated her as an equal, though even his friendship came with subtle reminders of her outsider status. "Ready for another thrilling milk run over the North Sea?" he asked with a grin. Before Erica could respond, the room fell silent as Colonel Harrison entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. At 48, Harrison carried himself with the bearing of someone who'd earned his rank through combat rather than politics. His flight suit bore patches from deployments in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria, a visual reminder of the real-world experience that separated him from the younger generation of pilots. "Gentlemen," Harrison began, his eyes briefly scanning the room before settling on the male pilots in the front rows. The word choice wasn't accidental. It never was. Intelligence has identified increased activity from hostile forces in the Baltic region. We're adjusting today's patrol routes to provide additional coverage of the northeastern approaches. Erica leaned forward, her notebook ready. This sounded more significant than the routine training missions they'd been flying for months. The Baltic had been a flashpoint of tension recently, with unidentified aircraft probing NATO airspace and testing response times. "The primary concern," Harrison continued, "is a squadron of advanced fighters that have been operating out of Kaliningrad. These aren't the outdated models we've seen before. Intelligence suggests we're looking at contemporary aircraft with experienced pilots who know our tactics." Major Thompson raised his hand. "Sir, what's our rules of engagement if we encounter hostile aircraft?" "Standard intercept procedures," Harrison replied. "Visual identification, radio warnings, escort to the boundary. But ... He paused, his expression growing more serious. "If they show hostile intent, you are authorized to defend yourselves and any NATO assets in the area." The energy in the room shifted palpably. This wasn't a training exercise or routine patrol. This was the kind of mission that every fighter pilot trained for, the chance to prove their worth in actual combat conditions. Harrison began reading the mission assignments, and Erica felt her pulse quicken with anticipation. "Thompson, you'll lead Alpha Flight with Peterson as your wingman. Davidson, you'll command Bravo Flight with Rodriguez. Charlie Flight will be..." As the assignments continued, Erica noticed a pattern that had become painfully familiar over her. 4 years of service. The primary missions, the ones with real strategic importance, were going to the same core group of pilots, all male, all American-born, all part of Harrison's inner circle. "What about Delta Flight, sir?" asked Captain James Hawk Wilson, another pilot who'd been passed over for the premium assignments. Harrison consulted his notes. "Delta Flight will maintain standard patrol patterns over the North Sea, Moore, you'll take the lead with Wilson as backup. He looked directly at Erica for the first time since entering the room. I need someone reliable for the routine coverage, while our primary assets handle the potential threat. The dismissal was polite, but unmistakable. While the other pilots would be flying toward potential combat, she'd be relegated to the safe, predictable patrol routes that any rookie pilot could handle. Erica felt the familiar burn of frustration, but kept her expression neutral. After the briefing, as pilots filed out discussing tactics and contingencies, Erica approached the mission board to review her assigned route. The North Sea Patrol was indeed routine, a rectangular pattern that would keep her well away from any potential action in the Baltic. "Don't take it personally," Major Thompson said, appearing beside her. "Harrison's just being cautious. The last thing he needs is an international incident if something goes wrong." "What's that supposed to mean?" Erica asked, though she already knew the answer. Thompson shifted uncomfortably. "Look, you're a great pilot, but you're also visible. If an American-trained European pilot gets into a shooting match with hostile forces, that becomes a diplomatic nightmare. Harrison's just protecting the mission." The explanation stung because it contained just enough logic to seem reasonable. Erica wasn't just being excluded because of her gender or her emotional nature. She was being excluded because her very identity represented a complication that the command structure preferred to avoid. "Besides," Thompson continued, "someone needs to maintain the standard patrol patterns. It's an important job. Important, but invisible. Critical, but unchallenging." Erica had heard these euphemisms countless times, and they all translated to the same thing. She was considered competent enough to handle routine duties, but not trusted with anything that truly mattered. As she walked toward the flight line, Erica caught fragments of conversation from the pilots who'd been assigned to the Baltic missions. They were discussing tactical formations, engagement sequences, and emergency procedures, the kind of detailed planning that went into missions where contact with enemy forces was not just possible, but expected. She thought about the hundreds of hours she'd spent studying exactly these scenarios, the tactical manuals she'd memorized, the contingency plan she'd developed for situations that were far more complex than what today's mission might bring. All of that preparation, all of that expertise, relegated to flying circles over empty ocean while others got the chance to prove themselves in actual combat. The worst part was the certainty that if something did go wrong, if the Baltic missions encountered more than they could handle, she'd be too far away to help. Her F-22 would be orbiting uselessly over the North Sea, while her fellow pilots faced threats that she was better prepared to handle than almost anyone in the squadron. But as she approached her aircraft, Erica made a decision that would change everything. She wouldn't just fly her assigned patrol route and wait for something to happen. She'd be ready for the moment when routine became extraordinary, when the careful boundaries that kept her away from real action suddenly didn't matter anymore. Because if 4 years of being underestimated had taught her anything, it was that the most important battles were often fought by the people nobody expected to win them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. While the other pilots at Ramstein Air Base spent their evenings unwinding at the officers' club or exploring the nearby German countryside, Captain Erica Moore had developed a different routine. Every night after her official duties ended, she made her way to Hangar 7, a rarely used maintenance facility that housed the base's advanced flight simulators. Using her security clearance and a carefully cultivated relationship with the night shift maintenance crew, she'd gained access to simulation programs that most pilots only encountered during formal training cycles. The simulator bay was Erica's sanctuary, a place where she could push both herself and virtual aircraft to their absolute limits without the constraints of safety protocols or commanding officers questioning her judgment. She'd programmed scenarios that went far beyond standard Air Force training, complex, multi-threat environments where she faced overwhelming odds and had to rely on split-second decision-making and unconventional tactics. Her favorite simulation was one she'd developed herself using classified intelligence reports about enemy aircraft capabilities. She'd reverse-engineered the flight characteristics of advanced Russian and Chinese fighters, creating virtual opponents that matched the performance of real-world threats. Night after night, she'd engage these computer-generated enemies in scenarios where she was outnumbered, outgunned, and forced to rely on superior positioning and tactical innovation to survive. The numbers from these private training sessions were staggering. Over the past 18 months, Erica had logged more than 400 hours of advanced combat simulation, more than most combat veterans accumulated in their entire careers. She'd faced every conceivable air-to-air combat scenario, high-altitude intercepts, low-level dogfights, beyond visual range engagements, and close-quarters combat that pushed her F-22's maneuvering capabilities to their theoretical limits. But the simulations were only part of her preparation. Erica had also developed an exhaustive study of enemy tactics, analyzing gun camera footage from recent encounters between NATO forces and hostile aircraft. She'd identified patterns in how enemy pilots approached different situations, noting their preferred attack angles, escape routes, and formation tactics. This intelligence wasn't available in standard briefing materials. She'd pieced it together from incident reports, debriefing transcripts, and classified analysis that she accessed through her security clearance. Her quarters reflected this obsession with tactical excellence. The walls were covered with detailed charts showing missile engagement envelopes, aircraft performance curves, and three-dimensional diagrams of optimal firing solutions. She'd memorized the radar signatures of every potential threat aircraft, could identify enemy fighters by their electronic emissions alone, and had developed mental calculators for computing intercept courses and fuel consumption under various combat conditions. The most impressive aspect of Erica's preparation was her development of what she called chaos scenarios, tactical situations where multiple variables changed simultaneously, forcing rapid adaptation and creative problem-solving. She'd studied historical air battles where conventional tactics failed, analyzing how successful pilots had improvised solutions under extreme pressure. From these studies, she developed her own tactical philosophy that emphasized flexibility, unpredictability, and the willingness to accept calculated risks that others might consider reckless. Her fellow pilots had no idea of the extent of her preparation. To them, she was simply the quiet European pilot who kept to herself and flew routine missions without complaint. They saw her competence during standard training exercises but had no reason to suspect that she'd transformed herself into a tactical expert who understood air combat dynamics better than pilots with years of actual combat experience. The irony was that her emotional nature, the trait that supposedly disqualified her from challenging missions, had driven her to achieve a level of preparation that was almost superhuman. Her emotions weren't a weakness that clouded her judgment. They were a source of motivation that pushed her to excel in ways that purely rational analysis could never achieve. Major Thompson occasionally noticed her dedication, commenting on how she seemed to know details about aircraft capabilities and tactical procedures that weren't covered in standard training. But even he didn't realize the full scope of her expertise. To him, she was simply a thorough pilot who took her job seriously, not someone who'd essentially earned a doctorate in air combat through independent study. This hidden preparation created a strange duality in Erica's military life. Officially, she was considered suitable only for routine missions and non-critical assignments. Unofficially, she'd developed capabilities that exceeded those of pilots who were regularly chosen for the most important operations. She knew more about enemy tactics than intelligence officers, understood her aircraft's capabilities better than test pilots, and had practiced combat scenarios that most operational pilots had never even considered. The frustrating part was that she couldn't demonstrate these skills without revealing the extent of her unauthorized activities. The simulation time, the classified research, the tactical analysis, all of it fell into gray areas of military protocol that could be interpreted as exceeding her assigned duties or inappropriately accessing sensitive information. So she waited, maintaining the facade of being a competent but unremarkable pilot, while secretly knowing that she was perhaps the best prepared fighter pilot on the base. She'd created her own University of Air Combat, appointed herself both professor and student, and graduated with honors that no one else could recognize. But Erica had learned patience from her 4 years of being underestimated. She understood that preparation without opportunity was merely potential energy waiting to be converted into kinetic force. And she had the growing sense that her opportunity was coming, that all the hidden hours of study and simulation were building toward a moment when her secret capabilities would finally matter. The only question was whether that moment would come in time to make a difference, or whether she'd spend her entire career watching from the sidelines as others faced the challenges she'd spent years preparing to meet. The pilot's ready room at Ramstein Air Base was where reputations were made and broken through a complex social hierarchy that had nothing to do with official rank structure. Captain Erica Moore understood this dynamic better than most, having spent 4 years observing the subtle ways that respect was distributed among the 52nd Fighter Wing's aviators. She sat at a corner table, ostensibly reviewing weather reports, but actually listening to the conversation that would determine who was considered worthy of tomorrow's most challenging assignments. "Did you see Moore's approach yesterday, Captain?" Bradley Torch Stevens was saying to a group of pilots clustered around the coffee station. "Textbook perfect, as always. I swear she could probably land that Raptor in her sleep." The comment was meant as a compliment, but Erica recognized the subtle dismissal embedded within it. Textbook perfect was pilot speak for predictable, safe, lacking the improvisational flair that separated good pilots from great ones. It suggested competence without inspiration, proficiency without passion. "That's the problem with European pilots," Major Thompson replied, though his tone carried less malice than simple observation. "They're trained to follow procedures exactly. Great for routine operations, but when things go sideways, you need someone who can think outside the manual." Lieutenant Colonel Davidson nodded in agreement. "I flew with a German pilot during an exchange program last year. Incredibly skilled, knew every regulation by heart, but when we encountered unexpected weather conditions, he just froze. Kept trying to find the procedure instead of adapting to the situation." Erica felt her jaw tighten, but continued reading her weather reports. She'd heard variations of this conversation countless times, discussions about cultural differences in pilot training that always seemed to conclude that American pilots possessed some unique combination of creativity and aggression that made them superior in combat situations. The irony was that her by-the-book approach was entirely strategic. She'd learned early in her career that any deviation from standard procedures would be seized upon as evidence of her unsuitability for complex missions. So she'd perfected a public persona of methodical competence while developing her real capabilities in private. "Plus there's the emotional factor," Stevens continued, lowering his voice slightly. "Not trying to be sexist here, but combat flying requires a certain level of detachment. You can't be thinking about the human cost when you're engaging targets. It's all about cold calculation." "Moore seems pretty controlled to me," offered Captain Wilson, one of the few pilots who regularly defended her. "On the surface, sure," Davidson replied. "But I've seen her after difficult missions. She takes things personally, analyzes every decision, questions whether she could have done something differently. That kind of second-guessing will get you killed in a real fight." The critique stung because it contained a grain of truth twisted into a damaging narrative. Erica did analyze her missions extensively, but not because of emotional weakness, because she understood that continuous improvement required honest self-assessment. Her post-mission reviews were more thorough than those of pilots who simply assumed they'd performed well enough. "Look," Major Thompson said, his tone suggesting he was trying to be fair, "Moore's a solid pilot. She'd be perfect for transport operations, aerial refueling, maybe even search and rescue. But air-to-air combat? That requires a killer instinct that you either have or you don't." The conversation shifted to other topics, but the damage was done. In 10 minutes of casual discussion, her colleagues had constructed a narrative that explained why she was unsuitable for the missions she most wanted to fly. She was too methodical, too emotional, too European, too analytical, a collection of traits that supposedly added up to fundamental inadequacy for real combat operations. What made it worse was that these weren't malicious attacks on her character. The pilots genuinely believed they were making objective assessments based on observable behavior. They'd created a reasonable-sounding explanation for why she consistently received assignments that didn't match her capabilities. Colonel Harrison entered the ready room, and the casual conversation immediately shifted to professional attention. But Erica noticed how he interacted with different pilots, the easy camaraderie with Stevens and Davidson, the respectful nods to Thompson and Peterson, and the polite but distant acknowledgement of her presence. "Gentlemen," Harrison announced, "I need volunteers for an advanced tactics exercise next week. We'll be practicing intercept procedures against simulated aggressors using realistic threat scenarios." Hands shot up around the room. This was exactly the kind of training that separated routine pilots from those considered ready for combat operations. Erica raised her hand as well, though she already knew what would happen. Harrison scanned the volunteers, making mental notes. "Thompson, you'll lead the exercise. Stevens, Davidson, Peterson, your primary participants. Rodriguez, Wilson, you'll serve as the aggressor squadron." Erica's hand remained raised, but Harrison's eyes seemed to skip over her entirely. The selection process was complete without her even being considered. "Sir," she said quietly, "I'd like to participate in the exercise." Harrison looked at her with the expression of someone who'd forgotten she was in the room. "Moore, I need you to coordinate with maintenance on the new avionics upgrades. We're installing updated radar systems on 3 aircraft, and I want someone detail-oriented managing the logistics." Detail-oriented, logistics, the words that had become synonymous with her career. Important work that kept her away from anything that might prove her worth as a combat pilot. She was being relegated to managing the installation of systems. She probably understood better than the pilots who would actually use them in combat. "Yes, sir," she replied, lowering her hand as the briefing concluded and pilots dispersed to their various duties. Erica remained at her table, staring at weather reports that suddenly seemed irrelevant. Around her, the selected pilots discussed tactics and strategy for the exercise. She wouldn't be allowed to join. The most frustrating part was that she couldn't directly challenge these decisions without appearing insubordinate or confirming suspicions about her emotional instability. She was trapped in a system that interpreted her dedication as weakness, her thoroughness as rigidity, and her European background as a fundamental limitation. But as she walked toward the maintenance hangar to begin coordinating avionics upgrades, Erica made a decision. She would use her access to the new radar systems to understand their capabilities, even better than the pilots who would fly with them. Every assignment that was meant to keep her away from combat operations would become another opportunity to develop expertise that her colleagues couldn't match, because someday, somehow, there would come a moment when all the dismissal and underestimation would become irrelevant, and her hidden capabilities would finally matter more than the assumptions others had made about her limitations. The incident that would fundamentally change Captain Erica Moore's relationship with the 52nd Fighter Wing began during what should have been a routine debriefing session. She just returned from her assigned North Sea patrol, having completed the mission with her usual precision and attention to detail. But as she entered the operations center to file her post-flight report, she overheard a conversation that would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. Colonel Harrison was speaking with Major Thompson and Captain Stevens near the large tactical display that showed current air traffic across European airspace. They were discussing the previous day's Baltic patrol mission, one of the assignments that Erica had been excluded from, and their voices carried the easy confidence of pilots reviewing a successful operation. The intercept went perfectly. Thompson was saying, "We identified the bogies at maximum range, established a firing solution, and escorted them out of NATO airspace without incident." "Good work," Harrison replied, "but I want to review the tactical approach." "Show me your intercept geometry." Stevens approached the display and began tracing flight paths with a laser pointer. "We came in from the southwest, established a two-ship formation, and maintained this angle of approach, ... Erica stopped walking and listened more carefully. Something about the geometry Stevens was describing didn't make sense. Based on the wind conditions and threat axis he was outlining, the approach he'd chosen would have left them vulnerable to a counterattack if the unidentified aircraft had been hostile. "The key was maintaining our energy advantage," Stevens continued. "We stayed high and fast, which gave us options if the situation escalated. But that wasn't accurate either." Erica had studied the weather reports from yesterday's mission, and the atmospheric conditions would have created significant turbulence at the altitude Stevens claimed they'd maintained. Either he was misremembering the mission parameters, or he was embellishing his account to make it sound more tactically sophisticated than it actually was. Harrison nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Maintaining tactical superiority while de-escalating potential threats." Erica felt a familiar frustration building. She'd spent months studying intercept procedures in far greater detail than, apparently, any of the pilots who were actually flying these missions. She could see the flaws in Stevens' tactical analysis, the missed opportunities for better positioning, the risks that hadn't been properly considered. Unable to contain herself, she stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir." I couldn't help but overhear the tactical review. The three men turned toward her with expressions ranging from surprise to mild annoyance. She clearly wasn't supposed to be participating in this discussion. "Yes, more?" Harrison's tone was neutral but carried an undertone of impatience. "I was reviewing yesterday's weather data, and I noticed that the atmospheric conditions would have created significant challenges for the approach angle," Captain Stevens described. "The wind shear at altitude would have made maintaining formation integrity very difficult." Stevens' expression hardened. "I was there, Moore. I think I know what conditions we actually encountered." "I'm sure you do," Erica replied carefully. "I was just suggesting that the tactical analysis might benefit from considering the meteorological factors that could have affected the mission outcome." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Harrison's face showed the kind of displeasure that came from having his subordinate corrected by someone who wasn't even supposed to be part of the conversation. "Moore," he said slowly, "Captain Stevens successfully completed a complex intercept mission against real-world threats. I'm not sure what makes you think you're qualified to second-guess his tactical decisions based on weather reports." The dismissal was sharp and public, but Erica couldn't let it go. "Sir, I've studied intercept procedures extensively. I believe I could offer valuable insights." "You've studied," Harrison interrupted. "Captain Stevens has executed. There's a significant difference between theoretical knowledge and practical application." Major Thompson stepped in, apparently trying to diffuse the situation. "Moore, I'm sure your weather analysis is thorough, but tactical debriefings require combat experience that can't be learned from textbooks. The comment hit like a physical blow. Erica felt her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "With respect, sir, how am I supposed to gain combat experience if I'm never assigned to missions where combat is possible?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Harrison's expression shifted from displeasure to something approaching anger. "Your mission assignments are based on operational requirements and your demonstrated capabilities," he said coldly. "If you have concerns about your career progression, we can discuss them during your next performance review." "My demonstrated capabilities," Erica repeated, her voice rising slightly despite her efforts to remain professional. "Sir, I've consistently scored higher on tactical evaluations than pilots who are regularly assigned to primary missions. I've logged more simulation hours than anyone in the squadron. I know enemy aircraft capabilities, intercept procedures, and engagement tactics better than pilots who have actually used those procedures in real-world situations." Stevens interjected. "Moore, you're a logistics officer with a pilot's license. Understanding theory doesn't qualify you for complex combat operations." The words were meant to diminish her, but they had the opposite effect. 4 years of accumulated frustration suddenly crystallized into clarity. She wasn't being excluded because she lacked capabilities. She was being excluded because her capabilities threatened the established order. "A logistics officer with a pilot's license," she repeated slowly. "Is that really what you think I am?" Harrison stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of command. "Moore, you're out of line. Report to my office at 1400 hours for a discussion about appropriate professional behavior." As the 3 men walked away, Erica remained standing beside the tactical display, staring at the intercept geometry that Stevens had outlined. She could see at least 3 ways the mission could have been executed more effectively. Tactical innovations that might have provided better intelligence about enemy capabilities while maintaining superior defensive positioning. But none of that mattered now. She'd crossed a line by questioning the tactical decisions of pilots who were considered her superiors, and there would be consequences. The meeting with Harrison would likely result in formal counseling about staying within her assigned role. And avoiding areas outside her expertise at the breaking point wasn't just about this single incident. It was about the realization that no amount of preparation or expertise would ever overcome the fundamental assumptions others had made about her capabilities. She could study harder, train longer, and prepare more thoroughly than anyone else, but she would always be seen as a logistics officer with a pilot's license rather than a warrior who happened to be assigned to logistics duties. As she walked toward her office to complete her post-flight paperwork, Erica made a decision that would change everything. She was done trying to prove herself through channels that were designed to exclude her. The next time an opportunity arose to demonstrate her true capabilities, she wouldn't wait for permission or worry about appropriate professional behavior, because sometimes the only way to prove you belong is to show up where you're not supposed to be and do what others say you can't do. The emergency klaxon shattered the afternoon quiet of Ramstein Air Base at 15:47 hours, its piercing wail cutting through routine operations like a knife through fabric. Captain Erica Moore was in Hangar 7, reviewing maintenance logs for the avionics upgrades she'd been assigned to coordinate, when the sound sent every person on the base into immediate high alert. Through the hangar's open doors, she could see personnel running toward their emergency stations, vehicles racing across the tarmac, and the controlled chaos that marked a genuine crisis rather than a training exercise. She dropped her clipboard and ran toward the operations center, her heart hammering against her ribs as fragments of radio chatter reached her through the open doorways of buildings she passed. The words she caught were terrifying: multiple bogies, NATO airspace violation, and most chilling of all, weapons lock. The operations center was a maelstrom of activity when she arrived. Every station was manned, multiple radio frequencies crackled with urgent communications, and the large tactical display showed a nightmare scenario unfolding in real time. 8 red dots had appeared over the Baltic Sea, moving in formation toward NATO-protected airspace at high speed. These weren't the usual probing flights that tested response times. The radar signatures and flight patterns indicated advanced fighter aircraft with hostile intent. Colonel Harrison stood at the center of the chaos, his face grim as he coordinated. The response: "Where are my primary assets?" He barked into his headset. "Alpha and Bravo flights are already airborne on the Baltic patrol," came the response from the air traffic controller. "They're moving to intercept, but the bogies are approaching from multiple vectors. We have insufficient assets to cover all approach routes." Erica pushed through the crowd of personnel until she could see the tactical display clearly. The situation was worse than the fragmented radio reports had suggested. The 8 enemy aircraft weren't flying in a single formation. They'd split into 3 groups approaching from different directions, creating a complex multi-axis threat that would stretch NATO's defensive resources to their breaking point. "What's the status of our interceptors?" Harrison demanded. Major Thompson's voice crackled through the radio from his F-22. "Alpha Flight has visual contact with the Northern Group, 4 aircraft, advanced configuration. They're not responding to radio warnings and are maintaining course toward German airspace." "Bravo Flight here," came Captain Stevens' voice. "We've got the Eastern Group in sight. 3 aircraft flying aggressive formation. They're jamming our communications and have activated targeting systems." Erica felt ice form in her stomach. 7 enemy aircraft were accounted for, but the tactical display showed 8 contacts. "Where's the 8th bogey?" she asked the nearest radar operator. The operator, a young sergeant named Williams, looked pale as he studied his screen. "Ma'am, we lost contact with the 8th aircraft about 5 minutes ago. It disappeared from radar somewhere over the central Baltic. A stealth aircraft." The realization hit Erica like a physical blow. While the visible enemy fighters drew attention and resources toward the northern and eastern approaches, an invisible 8th aircraft was almost certainly approaching from an unexpected direction, planning to exploit the gap in coverage created by the diversion. "Sir," she called to Colonel Harrison, "I think one of the enemy aircraft is using stealth technology. It's probably approaching from the south while our interceptors are engaged with the visible threats." Harrison turned toward her with an expression of barely controlled fury. "More, this is not the time for theoretical analysis. We have real threats demanding immediate response." But Erica was already studying the tactical display with the expertise she'd developed through hundreds of hours of simulation and analysis. The enemy's approach pattern wasn't random. It was a textbook multi-axis attack designed to overwhelm defensive responses. The southern approach route would bring the stealth aircraft directly over major German population centers if it wasn't intercepted. "Contact lost with Delta Flight," announced the radio operator handling search and rescue frequencies. Captain Wilson and his wingmen had been flying routine patrol over the North Sea when the emergency began, but their radio had gone silent. During their attempt to return to base, the operations center fell into a moment of terrible silence as everyone processed the implications. 2 F-22s were now unaccounted for, their pilots possibly down in the North Sea, while 8 enemy aircraft pressed their attack against inadequate defensive coverage. "Sir," Major Thompson's voice came through with static and stress, "the Northern Group is accelerating. They're showing hostile intent and have locked onto our aircraft. Request permission to engage." "Granted," Harrison replied immediately. "All flights are authorized to engage hostile aircraft threatening NATO airspace." The radio exploded with combat chatter as the engagement began. Erica listened to the real-time reports of missile launches, evasive maneuvers, and the deadly ballet of modern air combat. But her attention remained focused on the tactical display, where she could see the terrible mathematics of the situation unfolding. Alpha and Bravo flights were fully engaged with 7 enemy aircraft in 2 different areas. Delta flight was missing, possibly shot down. And somewhere in the gaps between these known threats, an 8th enemy aircraft was approaching undetected, with no NATO assets available to intercept it. "We need more interceptors," she said to Harrison, though she already knew what his response would be. "We don't have more interceptors," he snapped. "Every available aircraft is either engaged or down. The Luftwaffe is scrambling Eurofighters from Newburgh, but they won't arrive for 20 minutes. 20 minutes was an eternity in air combat. The stealth aircraft could penetrate deep into German airspace, potentially targeting critical infrastructure or military installations before defensive forces could respond. Worse, the ongoing engagement meant that even if NATO pilots successfully defeated the visible threats, they might lack the fuel or weapons to pursue the hidden 8th aircraft. Through the chaos of radio communications, Erica heard something that made her blood freeze. "Mayday, mayday, this is Bravo 2. I'm hit and going down. Last known position." The transmission cut off and static. Captain Stevens was down. One of the pilots who'd questioned her tactical knowledge just hours earlier was now fighting for his life somewhere over the Baltic Sea, and the defensive situation was deteriorating rapidly. Harrison was shouting orders, coordinating search and rescue for the downed pilots while trying to maintain coverage of the multiple threat axes. But Erica could see what he couldn't, or wouldn't, acknowledge: they were losing. The enemy had planned this attack perfectly, creating more threats than NATO forces could handle simultaneously. As she watched the tactical display update with new enemy positions, Erica realized that this was the moment she'd been preparing for throughout 4 years of frustration and dismissal. Every hour in the simulator, every classified report she'd studied, every tactical scenario she'd analyzed had led to this point. There was one F-22 Raptor sitting on the flight line, fully fueled and armed for her scheduled training mission. She had the tactical knowledge to find and engage the stealth aircraft that everyone else had missed. And she had approximately 10 minutes before the window of opportunity closed forever. The only question was whether she had the courage to take unauthorized action that would either save lives or end her career, possibly both. Standing in the operations center amid the controlled chaos of a multi-axis air attack, Captain Erica Moore experienced a moment of crystalline clarity that seemed to slow time itself. While Colonel Harrison coordinated defensive responses and radio chatter filled the air with combat reports, she found herself processing the tactical situation with the calm precision that came from years of theoretical preparation suddenly becoming deadly reality. The tactical display showed a 3-dimensional chess game where NATO was losing pieces faster than it could protect them. Alpha flight was engaged with 4 enemy aircraft over the northern Baltic. Bravo flight had lost Captain Stevens while fighting 3 more to the east, and Delta flight remained missing somewhere over the North Sea. But it was the invisible 8th aircraft that commanded Erica's complete attention. She'd studied this exact scenario during her private simulation sessions, a stealth aircraft, using conventional fighters as a diversion while approaching primary targets from an unexpected vector. The enemy had executed it perfectly, creating multiple simultaneous threats that exceeded NATO's ability to respond effectively. But Erica had also developed countermeasures for this situation, tactical innovations that she'd never been allowed to demonstrate in official training. "Ma'am," Sergeant Williams said quietly from his radar console, "I'm picking up some kind of atmospheric disturbance moving north from the Bavarian Alps. Could be weather, but the signature is unusual." Erica moved to his station and studied the radar return he was indicating. To most operators, it would look like a minor meteorological anomaly, the kind of atmospheric reflection that cluttered radar screens throughout mountainous regions. But she'd spent months learning to recognize the subtle signatures that stealth aircraft couldn't completely eliminate. "That's not weather," she said with absolute certainty. "That's your 8th bogey, using terrain masking and stealth technology to approach Munich from the south. Williams looked skeptical. "Ma'am, the signature is barely detectable." It could be anything. But Erica was already calculating intercept courses, fuel requirements, and weapons engagement envelopes with the mental precision that came from thousands of hours of practice. The stealth aircraft was following a flight path that would bring it over Bavaria's major population centers in approximately 18 minutes. Current NATO assets were too far away and too heavily engaged to respond in time, except for one possibility. Her F-22 Raptor was sitting on the flight line, fully fueled and loaded with a complete air-to-weapons package for the advanced tactics training that had been scheduled for this afternoon. The aircraft was ready for immediate launch, and she was the only pilot on the base who wasn't either engaged in combat or missing an action dot. The mathematical precision of the situation was almost beautiful in its simplicity. She had the aircraft, the weapons, the tactical knowledge, and the positional advantage necessary to intercept the stealth threat before it could reach its target. The only variables were authorization and consequences, neither of which would matter if German civilians died while NATO forces fought battles they couldn't win. "Sir," she called to Colonel Harrison, her voice cutting through the radio chatter, "I can intercept the southern bogey." Harrison turned toward her with an expression that suggested he'd forgotten she was still in the operations center. "Moore, we've been through this. You're not qualified for combat missions." "Sir, I'm the only pilot available, and I know exactly where that aircraft is heading." She pointed to the tactical display, tracing the stealth aircraft's probable course with practiced precision. "It's using the Alps for terrain masking, planning to emerge over Munich in approximately 17 minutes. My F-22 is ready for immediate launch." "Absolutely not," Harrison replied without hesitation. "You're a logistics officer, not a combat pilot. I won't risk losing another aircraft too." His words were cut off by Major Thompson's voice crackling through the radio with desperate urgency. "Alpha leader to base. We're Winchester on missiles and running low on fuel. The northern group is breaking toward Hamburg. We can't pursue without risking flame out over civilian areas." The radio fell silent as everyone in the operations center processed the implications. NATO's primary defensive assets were effectively neutralized, out of weapons, low on fuel, and unable to pursue the threats they'd been engaged with. Enemy's plan was working perfectly. "Sir," Erica pressed, "in 6 minutes, you won't have any other options. The Luftwaffe interceptors are still 12 minutes out, and every other NATO asset is either engaged, down, or too far away to matter." Harrison's face showed the strain of a commander watching his carefully planned defenses collapse in real time. "Moore, even if I wanted to authorize your launch, you don't have the experience to engage a stealth aircraft in single combat. That's a suicide mission." But Erica had run this exact scenario hundreds of times in simulation, studying stealth aircraft capabilities and developing engagement tactics that exploited their few remaining vulnerabilities. She knew their radar signatures, their performance limitations, and most importantly, their pilots' likely tactical responses to unexpected threats. "Sir, I have more simulation time against stealth targets than any pilot in this squadron. I've studied their capabilities, analyzed their weaknesses, and developed engagement protocols specifically for this type of threat. Simulation isn't combat," Harrison snapped, echoing the criticism she'd heard for years. "No, sir, it's not," Erica replied with calm precision. "But right now, simulation experience is the only experience anyone has with this specific threat. And I have more of it than anyone else." The operations center fell silent except for the ambient noise of radio communications and electronic systems. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing a moment where theoretical knowledge might prove more valuable than practical experience. A possibility that challenged fundamental assumptions about military readiness and pilot qualification. "Contact," Sergeant Williams suddenly announced. I've got a definitive radar signature emerging from the Alps. Bearing 270. Speed 450 knots, heading directly for Munich. Erica looked at the tactical display and felt time accelerate. The stealth aircraft had revealed itself, probably transitioning to attack configuration as it approached its target. In approximately 14 minutes, it would be over one of Germany's largest cities with unknown but certainly hostile intentions. "Sir," she said to Harrison, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, "that aircraft is going to reach Munich before any authorized interceptor can respond. I can stop it, but only if I launch in the next 3 minutes." Harrison stared at her, then at the tactical display, then back at her. She could see him calculating the same terrible mathematics that had already convinced her no other options existed that didn't involve unacceptable risk to civilian populations. "More," he said slowly, "if I authorize this launch, you'll be engaging an unknown enemy aircraft in single combat, with no backup and no support. If you fail, you die. If you succeed but violate rules of engagement, you face court-martial. And if you're wrong about that radar signature, you'll have launched an unauthorized attack against a potentially friendly aircraft." Erica met his gaze without flinching. "Sir, I'd rather face those consequences than watch German civilians die while I had the capability to prevent it." The words hung in the air between them, representing 4 years of frustration distilled into a single moment of absolute clarity. This was why she'd trained in secret, why she'd studied beyond her assigned duties, why she'd prepared for scenarios that others considered beyond her capabilities. Harrison looked at her for a long moment, seeing perhaps for the first time not the logistics officer he'd tried to constrain, but the warrior she'd always been underneath. "More," he said finally. "Get to your aircraft." The 3 seconds of silence that followed Colonel Harrison's apparent authorization felt like an eternity, but Erica Moore should have recognized the expression crossing his face. She'd seen it before, the look of a commander who'd momentarily considered an impossible option before rational analysis reasserted itself. As she turned toward the exit, ready to sprint to her F-22, Harrison's voice stopped her cold. "Belay that order," he said sharply. "More, stay where you are." Erica felt her heart sink as she turned back to face him. Around the operations center, personnel continued coordinating the deteriorating defensive situation, but she could sense their attention shifting toward this unexpected drama unfolding in their midst. "Sir," she began, but Harrison raised a hand to silence her. "I'm sorry, Moore. For a moment there, I let desperation cloud my judgment." His voice carried the authority of someone who'd made a final decision. "You are not authorized to launch, period." The tactical display continued showing the stealth aircraft's approach toward Munich, its estimated time to target now reduced to 12 minutes. Erica watched the icon representing hundreds of thousands of civilian lives growing smaller as she stood powerless to act. "Sir, that aircraft will be intercepted by qualified pilots using proper procedures." Harrison interrupted. "Sergeant Williams, contact Newburgh Air Base. Get me an updated ETA on those Eurofighters." Williams worked his radio for 30 seconds before responding with information that everyone already knew would be insufficient. "Sir, Luftwaffe reports Eurofighters will be on station in 11 minutes. They're pushing maximum speed. But ... The unspoken conclusion hung in the air. 11 minutes was too long. The stealth aircraft would reach Munich with at least 60 seconds to spare, more than enough time to execute whatever mission it had been assigned. Major Thompson's voice crackled through the radio with an update that made the situation even worse. "Base, this is Alpha Leader. We've successfully engaged the Northern Group, but we're critically low on fuel and Winchester on air-to-air missiles. Requesting immediate vector to Ramstein for emergency landing." "Approved," Harrison responded immediately. "Bravo Flight, what's your status?" The response came from Captain Rodriguez, who'd assumed command after Stevens was shot down. "Bravo. Leader here. We've neutralized 2 enemy aircraft, but the third broke contact and is heading west. We're pursuing, but our fuel state is critical." Erica felt the terrible mathematics of the situation crystallizing. NATO's primary interceptors had successfully engaged 7 of the 8 enemy aircraft, but they'd exhausted their weapons and fuel in the process. The 8th aircraft, the one that had always been the real threat, was approaching its target with no effective opposition. "Sir," she tried again, "my aircraft is the only. Your aircraft will remain on the ground." Harrison cut her off. "That's a direct order, Moore. You're not qualified for this mission." The words stung not just because of their finality, but because of the assumptions they revealed. Even facing a situation where her unauthorized action might save lives, Harrison couldn't overcome his fundamental belief that she was inadequate for combat operations. Lieutenant Colonel Davidson, who'd been monitoring communications with higher command, approached Harrison with a grim expression. "Sir, EUCOM is asking for our assessment of the threat to Munich. They want to know if we can guarantee interception before the bogey reaches the city." Harrison's face showed the strain of a commander being asked to promise something he couldn't. "Deliver. Tell them. Tell them we're doing everything possible to ensure successful interception." It was a non-answer that everyone in the operations center recognized as diplomatic language for "probably not." Erica watched the tactical display update with new information that made the situation even more desperate. The stealth aircraft had accelerated, apparently entering its final attack profile. "Sir," she said, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the operations center, "I have 4 years of advanced tactical training, more simulation time against stealth targets than any pilot in this squadron, and an aircraft that's ready for immediate launch. I can intercept that target." The room fell silent, except for radio chatter from ongoing operations. Every person present understood that they were witnessing a moment where theoretical capabilities might prove more valuable than traditional qualifications. Harrison looked at her with something approaching pity. "Moore, you have 4 years of logistics experience and some simulator time. That's not the same as combat readiness. I won't send an unqualified pilot on a suicide mission just because she thinks she's prepared for it." "Unqualified," Erica repeated, feeling 4 years of frustration distilling into perfect clarity. "Sir, what qualification would make me suitable? For this mission, what specific requirement do I not meet?" "Combat experience," Harrison replied immediately. "Proven performance under fire. The ability to make life or death decisions without hesitation. You don't have any of those things. How can I gain combat experience if I'm never assigned to missions where combat is possible?" The question that had been building for years finally found its voice. "Sir, you've created a perfect circle where I can't prove my capabilities because I'm not considered qualified, and I'm not considered qualified because I haven't proven my capabilities." Davidson stepped forward, apparently trying to diffuse the tension. "Moore, there's a difference between peacetime training and actual combat. When that stealth aircraft starts shooting, you'll need instincts that can only be developed through real-world experience." But Erica had run this exact scenario hundreds of times, facing computer-generated enemies that fought with tactical precision that exceeded human capabilities. She'd practiced every possible engagement sequence, studied every potential complication, and developed responses to variables that hadn't occurred to pilots who relied solely on official training. "Sir," she said to Harrison, "in approximately 9 minutes, that aircraft will be over Munich. The Luftwaffe interceptors will arrive too late. Our qualified pilots are either engaged, down, or out of weapons. I am the only option that can prevent civilian casualties." Harrison's expression hardened into the kind of absolute authority that ended conversations. "Moore, you are not launching. That's final. If you attempt to access your aircraft without authorization, you'll be arrested for disobeying direct orders. The threat was clear and unambiguous. Any action she took would be considered mutiny, with all the legal and professional consequences that implied. Her military career would end in court-martial, her reputation would be destroyed, and she'd face potential imprisonment. But as she looked at the tactical display, showing the stealth aircraft's relentless approach toward Munich, Erika realized that some things were more important than careers, regulations, or the approval of superior officers who couldn't see past their own limitations. "I understand, sir," she replied. Though her understanding was different from what Harrison intended, she understood that saving lives sometimes required actions that couldn't be officially authorized. She understood that proving herself would require defying the very people whose approval she'd once sought. And she understood that the next few minutes would determine whether she remained Captain Erika Moore, logistics officer with a pilot's license, or became something else entirely. "Good," Harrison said, apparently satisfied that the matter was resolved. "Now let's focus on coordinating with the Luftwaffe and ensuring proper procedures are followed." As activity in the operations center returned to managing the crisis through official channels, Erika quietly slipped toward the exit. Behind her, voices discussed contingency plans and diplomatic protocols, while a clock counted down toward the moment when all their careful procedures would prove inadequate. She had approximately 7 minutes to reach her aircraft, complete pre-flight checks, and launch before the stealth aircraft reached Munich. It would be the most important unauthorized action of her life. Captain Erika Moore stood at the threshold of the operations center, her hand on the door handle as the weight of her decision crystallized with perfect clarity. Behind her, Colonel Harrison was coordinating a response that everyone knew would arrive too late, while ahead of her lay a path that would either save hundreds of thousands of lives or destroy her military career forever. The choice, she realized, had already been made the moment she'd seen the stealth aircraft's approach vector toward Munich. She slipped out of the operations center and immediately broke into a run toward the flight line, her mind automatically shifting into the pre-combat checklist she'd rehearsed thousands of times in simulation. 6 minutes to intercept window. Pre-flight inspection could be abbreviated to 90 seconds. Engine start and taxi would take 2 minutes. That left her with a razor-thin margin for error that would have been impossible without her obsessive preparation. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the tarmac as she approached her F-22 Raptor, sitting exactly where she'd left it after the morning's routine maintenance inspection. The aircraft looked deceptively peaceful in the golden light, its angular stealth geometry giving no hint of the lethal capabilities contained within its titanium and composite frame. But Erika knew every system, every weapon, every performance parameter of this particular aircraft better than she knew her own heartbeat. As she began her abbreviated pre-flight inspection, her radio earpiece crackled with updates from the ongoing crisis. Major Thompson's Alpha flight had successfully landed at Ramstein with fuel tanks nearly empty, while Captain Rodriguez's Bravo flight was still pursuing the surviving enemy aircraft westward over the North Sea, the stealth aircraft approaching. Munich remained undetected by anyone except Sergeant Williams. Careful radar analysis. Erika's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she checked control surfaces, verified weapons status, and confirmed fuel levels. The F-22 carried a full load of a IM-12 AMRAAM missiles and a IM-9X Sidewinders, more than sufficient firepower to engage a single target if she could achieve proper positioning. The aircraft's stealth capabilities would give her the element of surprise, while her superior knowledge of enemy tactics would provide the tactical advantage necessary for success. Aircraft 914012, this is Ramstein Tower, came an unexpected voice through her radio. You are not cleared for engine start. Remain in position. Someone had noticed her unauthorized pre-flight activities. Erika keyed her microphone with calm Professionalism. Tower, this is 914012. I'm conducting routine pre-flight inspection for scheduled training mission. Negative, 4012. All training missions have been canceled due to current emergency status. Shut down immediately and report to operations. The tower controller was following proper procedures, but Erica was already climbing into the cockpit. She had approximately 4 minutes before the stealth aircraft reached Munich, and every second of delay reduced her chances of successful intercept. There was no time for explanations, negotiations, or proper authorization. Tower 4012 is experiencing radio difficulties. She transmitted, then switched off her radio completely. The F-22's cockpit came alive around her as she initiated the engine start sequence. Twin Pratt & Whitney engines spooled up with increasing urgency. Their combined thrust of 70,000 pounds, representing more raw power than most people would ever control. But power without precision was useless, and Erica's 4 years of preparation had been entirely focused on developing the precision necessary to use this capability effectively. Through her heads-up display, she could see base security vehicles beginning to converge on her position. Colonel Harrison had undoubtedly realized what was happening and ordered her immediate arrest. But the F-22's engines were already at idle power, and taxi clearance was a luxury she couldn't afford to wait for. She released the brakes and began rolling toward the active runway, ignoring radio calls that she could no longer hear. The base's emergency protocols were designed to prevent unauthorized aircraft movements, but they'd never been tested against a pilot who understood those protocols well enough to circumvent them. Erica had studied every security procedure, every emergency response, every possible method of preventing what she was attempting. Her knowledge of these systems now became her greatest asset. She knew that base security couldn't simply shoot at an F-22 without risking catastrophic damage to surrounding facilities. She knew that air traffic control couldn't physically prevent her takeoff once she reached the runway. And she knew that, once airborne, she'd be beyond the reach of anyone except other fighter aircraft, all of which were either engaged, down, or out of fuel. The runway stretched ahead of her like a pathway to either vindication or destruction. In approximately 2 minutes, she'd either be airborne and vectoring toward the stealth aircraft threatening Munich, or she'd be sitting in a military prison cell while German civilians died and her career ended in disgrace. But as she advanced the throttles to military power and felt 70,000 pounds of thrust push her back into the ejection seat, Erica realized that she'd never been more certain of any decision in her life. This was why she'd trained in secret, why she'd studied beyond her assigned duties, why she'd prepared for scenarios that others considered beyond her capabilities. The F-22 lifted off from Ramstein Air Base at exactly 16:03 hours, climbing through 10,000 feet before anyone could mount an effective response to stop her. Behind her, she left a base in chaos and a commanding officer whose assumptions about her capabilities had just been challenged in the most dramatic way possible. Ahead of her, somewhere in the airspace over Bavaria, an enemy pilot was approaching Munich with unknown but certainly hostile intentions. In approximately 3 minutes, she'd find out whether 4 years of unauthorized preparation had been enough to transform her from Captain Erica Moore, logistics officer, into something the enemy hadn't planned for. As she leveled off at 40,000 feet and activated her air-to-air radar, Erica keyed her radio one final time. Munich Control. This is Ramstein 4012. I have an unknown aircraft approaching your airspace with hostile intent. I am moving to intercept. The response came immediately, filled with confusion and disbelief. 4012. You are not authorized for interception duties. Identify yourself and state your intentions. Erica looked at her radar display, where a faint contact was beginning to appear exactly where she'd predicted the stealth aircraft would be. Her tactical analysis had been correct. Her preparation had been adequate. and her unauthorized action was about to be tested against an enemy who had no idea that the pilot everyone considered unqualified for combat was now the only thing standing between them and their target. "Munich Control," she replied with calm precision. "This is Captain Erica Moore, and I'm about to prove that qualifications and authorization aren't the same thing." At 40,000 feet above the Bavarian countryside, Captain Erica Moore's F-22 Raptor cut through the afternoon sky like a technological spear aimed at the heart of an invisible enemy. The aircraft's stealth configuration rendered it nearly undetectable to enemy radar, while its advanced sensors painted a three-dimensional picture of the battlespace that few pilots had ever learned to interpret with her level of precision. But Erica had spent hundreds of hours in simulation learning to read the subtle electromagnetic signatures that revealed the presence of threats others couldn't see. Her heads-up display showed the faint radar return that Sergeant Williams had identified, a contact so subtle that most pilots would have dismissed it as atmospheric interference. But Erica's extensive study of stealth aircraft characteristics allowed her to recognize the pattern for what it truly was: an advanced enemy fighter using terrain masking and electronic countermeasures to approach Munich undetected. Contact bearing 090, range 42 miles, altitude 25,000 feet, she announced to herself, following the verbal protocol she'd practiced thousands of times. The enemy aircraft was lower than expected, probably using the Alps radar shadow to mask its approach until the final attack run. It was exactly the kind of tactical sophistication that had allowed it to penetrate NATO airspace while conventional defenses were distracted by the diversionary attack. Erica began her intercept geometry with the mathematical precision that had characterized every aspect of her unauthorized preparation. The enemy aircraft's current course and speed would bring it over Munich city center in approximately 4 minutes. Her F-22's superior performance gave her multiple engagement options, but only if she positioned herself correctly within the narrow window of opportunity. She advanced her throttles to military power, feeling the twin engines respond with the kind of acceleration that transformed physics into personal experience. The airspeed indicator climbed past Mach 1.2 as she angled toward an intercept course that would bring her into weapons range with minimal warning to the enemy pilot. Her 4 years of tactical study had taught her that successful air combat was less about raw speed than about positioning, timing, and the ability to achieve surprise. The radio chatter from Ramstein Air Base had reached fever pitch behind her. Colonel Harrison was undoubtedly coordinating efforts to recall her unauthorized flight, while Munich Control was trying to understand how an American pilot had appeared in their airspace without proper coordination. But Erica had switched to backup radio frequencies, monitoring the situation while maintaining the communication silence necessary for her approach. Through her multifunction displays, she could track the ongoing situation across the broader battlefield. Major Thompson's Alpha flight had successfully landed at Ramstein, their fuel tanks nearly empty after engaging the northern group of enemy aircraft. Captain Rodriguez's Bravo flight was still pursuing the surviving western threat over the North Sea, but they were also approaching critical fuel levels. The diversionary attacks had successfully drawn NATO's primary assets away from the real target. But the enemy hadn't planned for a pilot who'd spent years studying their exact tactics, who'd practiced against computer-generated opponents that flew with precision exceeding human capabilities, who'd developed countermeasures for scenarios that official training programs had never considered. Erica's unauthorized preparation was about to encounter its ultimate test. "Range 30 miles and closing," she reported to herself, maintaining the verbal discipline that kept her focused under pressure. Her radar was painting increasingly detailed information about the enemy aircraft, its approximate size, speed, and electronic emissions. The signatures matched her expectations for an advanced multi-role fighter, probably carrying both air-to-air and air-to-ground weapons, The tactical situation crystallized with perfect clarity as she closed the range. The enemy pilot was flying a profile optimized for ground attack, maintaining steady course and altitude while probably focusing on target acquisition for Munich's critical infrastructure. He wasn't expecting air-to-air threats because NATO's visible assets were engaged elsewhere, and stealth aircraft were generally considered immune to interception once they penetrated defended airspace. Erika's F-22 represented a threat that the enemy had never planned for, a technologically superior aircraft flown by a pilot whose knowledge of his tactics exceeded his knowledge of hers. The engagement would test not just her flying skills, but her ability to apply 4 years of theoretical study under conditions where mistakes meant death. 20 miles and closing, she announced, beginning the weapon selection process that would determine the engagement sequence. Her AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles provided beyond visual range capability, while the AIM-9X Sidewinders offered close-range precision. The choice would depend on how the tactical situation developed in the next 60 seconds. Through her heads-up display, she could see Munich's skyline in the distance, hundreds of thousands of people going about their daily lives, unaware that their safety depended on the unauthorized actions of a pilot whose own command structure had declared her unqualified for this exact mission. The irony wasn't lost on her. After 4 years of being told she lacked the combat experience necessary for real missions, she was about to engage an enemy aircraft in single combat with no backup, no support, and no official authorization. Her success or failure would be determined entirely by the quality of her unauthorized preparation and the accuracy of her tactical analysis. 15 miles and closing, she reported, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Target is maintaining course toward Munich, preparing for engagement. The enemy aircraft appeared on her targeting display as more than just a radar return. It was now a three-dimensional threat with weapons, intentions, and a pilot who'd successfully penetrated NATO's defensive screen. In approximately 90 seconds, she'd discover whether her secret expertise was sufficient to defeat an enemy that everyone else had failed to stop. But as she armed her weapon systems and began the final approach sequence, Erika felt a calm certainty that surprised her. This was the moment she'd been preparing for throughout every frustrating assignment, every dismissed suggestion, every night spent studying tactics that others considered beyond her. Responsibilities that the enemy had planned for everything except the possibility that the pilot they'd never expected to encounter was also the one they were least prepared to face. The crowd gathered around the flight line at Ramstein Air Base as Captain Erika Moore's F-22 Raptor touchdown represented every possible outcome her unauthorized mission could have produced. Colonel Harrison stood at the center, his face unreadable as he watched the aircraft that had just accomplished what his entire defensive strategy had failed to achieve. Beside him, Major Thompson and the other pilots who'd survived the days. Engagements waited with expressions ranging from admiration to disbelief. As Erika taxied toward the parking area, she could see base security vehicles positioned strategically around the flight line, a clear indication that her return would be met with immediate detention rather than celebration. She'd expected this response and accepted it as the price for proving that unauthorized action sometimes produced results that proper procedures couldn't achieve. The F-22's engines spooled down as she completed her shutdown checklist with the same methodical precision that had characterized every aspect of her military service. Through her cockpit canopy, she could see the crowd growing larger as word spread throughout the base that the pilot everyone had considered unqualified for combat missions had just single-handedly neutralized the primary threat to German civilian populations. Colonel Harrison approached her aircraft as she climbed down from the cockpit, his expression carrying the complexity of a commander whose fundamental assumptions had been challenged by undeniable results. Behind him, She recognized faces from the operations center who'd witnessed her unauthorized departure and the successful conclusion of her mission. "Moore," Harrison said as she reached the ground, his voice carrying authority that couldn't quite mask his confusion. "You are under arrest for disobeying direct orders, unauthorized use of military aircraft, and engaging enemy forces without proper authorization." Erica stood at attention, accepting the consequences she'd known would follow her success. "Yes, sir, I understand." But before the security personnel could move forward, Major Thompson stepped between them. "Sir, I think we need to consider the circumstances. Captain Moore just accomplished what our entire defensive strategy failed to achieve." "That's not the point," Harrison replied, though his tone suggested uncertainty about what the point actually was. "Military discipline requires following orders, not second-guessing command decisions based on personal judgment." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a staff car carrying insignia that made everyone on the flight line stand straighter. General Patricia Kellner, commander of U.S. Air Forces in Europe, emerged with the kind of presence that transformed routine situations into career-defining moments. "Colonel Harrison," she said as she approached the group, "I understand we have a situation that requires clarification." Harrison's demeanor shifted to attention as he addressed his superior officer. "Yes, ma'am. Captain Moore disobeyed direct orders and conducted an unauthorized engagement against enemy aircraft." General Kellner looked at Erica with the kind of analytical assessment that senior officers use to evaluate potential rather than just performance. "Captain Moore, I've been briefed on the tactical situation. 8 enemy aircraft penetrated NATO airspace using sophisticated tactics that overwhelmed our defensive response. Is it correct that you identified and engaged the primary threat while our qualified assets were unable to respond effectively?" "Yes, ma'am," Erica replied. "I detected a stealth aircraft approaching Munich and engaged it when no other assets were available for intercept." "And how did you acquire the tactical knowledge necessary to detect and engage a stealth aircraft that our primary defensive systems failed to identify?" The question represented the moment Erica had been preparing for throughout 4 years of unauthorized study. "Ma'am, I conducted extensive independent research into enemy tactics and stealth aircraft capabilities. I developed engagement protocols through simulation and analysis that exceeded standard training requirements." General Kellner nodded slowly, apparently processing information that challenged conventional assumptions about pilot qualification and combat readiness. "Captain Moore, your actions today prevented what intelligence analysis suggests would have been a catastrophic attack on German civilian infrastructure. However, you also violated direct orders and military protocol in the most dramatic way possible." The silence that followed carried the weight of a decision that would determine not just Erica's future, but the Air Force's willingness to recognize that exceptional circumstances sometimes required exceptional responses. "Colonel Harrison," General Kellner continued, "I'm reassigning Captain Moore to the 1st Fighter Wing's Advanced Tactics Division, effective immediately. Her demonstrated capabilities and tactical innovation represent exactly the kind of thinking we need for 21st century air combat." The words hit like a physical blow, but in the opposite direction from what Erica had expected. Instead of court-martial and disgrace, she was being promoted to a position that would utilize the expertise she'd developed through years of unauthorized preparation. "Ma'am," Harrison began, "Captain Moore violated direct orders." "Captain Moore prevented civilian casualties through superior tactical analysis and exceptional flying skill." General Kellner interrupted. "Those are the qualifications that matter in combat operations, not the ability to follow procedures that prove inadequate when lives are on the line." 6 months later, Major Erica Moore stood in the same briefing room where she'd once been excluded from primary missions, but everything had changed. The advanced tactics patch on her shoulder carried weight that her logistics insignia never had. And when she spoke about enemy capabilities and engagement procedures, every pilot in the room listened with the attention reserved for someone who'd proven their expertise under the ultimate conditions. The key to defeating stealth aircraft, she told the assembled pilots, is understanding that they're not invisible, they're just harder to see. With proper analysis and tactical innovation, every aircraft can be detected and engaged. Captain Stevens, now fully recovered from his Baltic Sea shootdown, raised his hand. Major, how do we develop the kind of tactical knowledge that allows us to anticipate enemy innovations? Erica's answer reflected the lesson she'd learned through 4 years of frustration and 1 afternoon of vindication. By refusing to accept that your assigned duties define the limits of your capabilities. Study beyond your requirements, train harder than expected, and prepare for scenarios that others consider impossible. As the briefing concluded and pilots dispersed to their various duties, Erica reflected on the journey that had brought her from overlooked logistics officer to recognized tactical expert. The unauthorized mission that had risked her career had instead transformed it, proving that sometimes the most important battles were fought by people who refused to accept the limitations others placed on them. Her story had become legend throughout the Air Force, the pilot who was deemed unqualified for combat missions, until she conducted the most successful unauthorized engagement in recent military history. But more importantly, her example had inspired other pilots to expand their capabilities beyond their assigned roles, creating a new generation of aviators who understood that preparation and capability mattered more than official authorization. Through her office window, she could see F-22 Raptors on the flight line, ready for missions that would test their pilots' abilities under conditions that no training program could fully replicate. But now those pilots were prepared not just with official procedures, but with the kind of comprehensive tactical knowledge that could mean the difference between success and failure when conventional wisdom proved inadequate. Major Erica Moore had learned that proving yourself sometimes meant defying the people who claimed to know your limitations. And in proving herself, she'd changed not just her own career, but the entire approach to pilot qualification and combat readiness, because the most qualified pilot isn't always the one with the most official experience. Sometimes it's the one who's prepared for the mission that nobody expected them to fly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.